Donald sees himself as a dictator, and his comments confirm that. He has said anything he does, if he's saving the country, it cannot be against the law. And I contend that since he said that on February 15th, he is America's de facto dictator. He's simply consolidating power.
Hi, I'm Jo Crawford, and welcome to Times Radio's Trump Report. Today, I'm joined by David Cay Johnston, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, professor at Rochester Institute of Technology, and author of an array of books on Donald Trump. Thank you for joining me on the Trump Report today.
Glad to be with you.
So we're back on the subject of Ukraine, David, and Donald Trump, he's claimed that a deal to end Russia's war in Ukraine is very close. What do you make of this?
Well, there is a deal to be made were the Ukrainians to give up Crimea and the Donbass and other oblasts that have been taken over. On the other side of this, Putin is the one who needs a break here. He has run through his munitions. The aid provided by Europe, the UK, and the US, which is not cash but weaponry, has decimated and utterly destroyed the Russian military's war-making capacity. They are literally using donkey carts to bring food and ammunition to the front lines. The Russian Defense Ministry's defense of that is, well, armies have always used donkey carts. Yeah, before there were mechanized ones. So, Trump is still doing, along with J.D. Vance, what they've done all the way along. They're for peace on Moscow's terms.
And it's interesting because we saw that Trump, he appeared to be quite annoyed at Zelensky for saying to the Wall Street Journal that Ukraine wouldn't accept giving up Crimea as part of a peace deal with Russia. And as you mentioned, it's been reported that in Trump's 7-point peace plan that it's potentially including a proposal that America would formally recognize Crimea as Russian sovereign territory. I mean, how do we see this moving forward, though?
The U.S. wouldn't give up Florida and the U.K. wouldn't give up the Midlands. This is ridiculous. You have an invader who is violating their own written promise not to invade. And what you're really seeing here is that Donald Trump is all talk. He doesn't have any capacity. There's a meme going around the U.S. today that shows Xi Jinping and Donald Trump playing cards. And Trump says, all in. Xi Jinping says, call. And Trump goes, fold. It's all bluster. And his belief that people will just bow to his will. And Donald loves this. This is, Donald, who I've known and covered for 37 years. The idea that the head of a foreign state would have to come hat in hand to him and beg that's so important to Donald's ego and his belief that he is the most special person in the world.
And we saw him write on Truth Social. He said that the man with no cards, which we presume refers to Zelensky, he should now finally get it done. That's what we're hearing from Trump there. It comes after we had this attack from Russia on Ukraine, reported by Kyiv to have killed about 9 people. Yet we still got Trump going on that narrative that Zelensky needs to get this peace deal done.
On the other side of this, Joe, one of the things to think about is in the 12 months of the third year of the war, so up until almost the end of February of this year, there were 400,000 soldiers on the Russian side killed, not casualties, which includes injured, but killed. And what did they gain for 400,000 lives? 0.5% of the territory of Ukraine. That is a butcher bill without precedent in warfare anywhere.
It's interesting that you mentioned that as well, because there's some suggestions that some sort of peace deal, some sort of ceasefire gives Russia time to recuperate, rebuild up its forces and its capacity.
Yeah, for the moment, people who live in Moldova, Poland, Slovakia, they're safe from the Russian military simply because they don't have any war-making capacity left. But give Putin time to rebuild his military, and he's been very clear for more than 25 years that the worst thing in the 20th century geopolitically was the collapse of the Soviet Union and its satellites, and he wants to put all that back together. with him as leader. So he's not changed his spots. Leopards don't change their spots.
What did you make of earlier this week with Marco Rubio? He withdrew from plans for a meeting in London, but then he also said that the US may walk away from negotiations due to a lack of progress with Russia and Ukraine. What did you make of that?
Well, Marco Rubio has proven to be a politician who will completely give up his self-identity, his history, in order to please Donald Trump. He is the son of Cuban refugees who came here when Castro and the communists took over Cuba. His family was historically aligned with Batista, the very right-wing and kleptocratic dictator in Cuba. And he in the past has said all sorts of terrible things about Donald Trump, all of which are true. That he's incompetent, he doesn't know what he's doing, he's a fraud. But now, because he got to be Secretary of State, he will do and say anything Donald wants. It's astonishing how many people in public life will walk away from any set of principles or self-respect in return for a position.
And it reminds me of what you said about this juxtaposition in action versus words. It's something that we see a lot with Trump. And as we saw, Marco Rubio not attending this meeting, but then, saying that there wasn't much progress being made. It's a contradiction there, isn't it?
Donald has this belief that he can just wave his hand and things will happen. And we're seeing in the U.S. that doesn't work. The same thing is true in world politics. I mean, this idea that Zelensky, because he's in a tougher spot in some ways than Moscow, is going to bow down to him and give him what he wants, is just an unrealistic expectation. Now, the so-called peace talks involve Witkoff, Trump's special ambassador or emissary, both in the Israeli-Gaza matter and here. And he's made a number of statements that suggest he is not deeply schooled in the issues that are here. He has spoken repeatedly what are plain and simple Russian propaganda lines. And I think I mentioned on an earlier show with you that, Putin contends that Ukraine is a child of Mother Russia. 1,000 years ago, Moscow was a couple of huts in the trees, and Kyiv was a thriving metropolis. It was just ridiculous to make that claim. But that's what Russians are raised and told and constantly presented to them. The so-called peace talks, nothing's going to change there as long as the U.S. is on the side of the Russians rather than the side of actual peace.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on Trump's former National Security Advisor, Fiona Hill. She said that Donald Trump wants to emulate Vladimir Putin and govern his own country in a similar fashion. How do you think Trump is going to take those comments?
Well, I've been saying the same thing about Donald since 2015. Donald sees himself as a dictator, and his comments confirm that. He has said anything he does, if he's saving the country, it cannot be against the law. And I contend that since he said that on February 15th, he is America's de facto dictator. He's simply consolidating power. Fiona Hill is someone who has troubled Trump ever since she broke with him. She is a serious, highly trained scholar with very deep knowledge of the personalities as well as the issues. And Donald has no use or interest for people like that. He has no deep understanding of anything. He is appallingly ignorant. He simply gets an idea in his head. The country we put a tariff on pays the tariffs. Doesn't matter that that's nonsense. He will stick to it. And he has this enormous affinity for the Russians, who, remember, have been putting money in his pocket by his and his family's own account for a long, long time. There were many Russian criminals who bought apartments in Trump Tower and paid huge premiums over market prices because in all but one other nice building in Manhattan, you had to pass a background test. My wife and I own a tiny 25 square meter apartment in New York, and we had to jump through hoops just to be able to buy that. You showed up with cash to pay Donald, and in some cases, I mean literally cash, not checks, greenbacks. As long as you paid his way above market price, he'd let you in. So understand, Donald is the third generation head of a 4-generation white-collar crime family They operate on the basis of threats of litigation and assertions, and they're used to having their bullying work. It's not working here. It's not going to work here. And anyone who has studied the history of wars where people are defending their own turf, Vietnam, the American Revolution, it's very hard for a foreign power to defeat people working to save their own liberty in their own country.
How do you think Putin would be receptive of this?
If you think about the world from the point of view of Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump has never criticized him. He has publicly said he trusts Putin and doesn't trust any of the American intelligence agencies. He has met alone with him with no other American in the room. And in one case, the only American was the translator, and he tore up her notes, which is arguably a crime in the United States. So what Putin wants to do is maintain as much as he can Donald Trump as his effective ally and asset. And his biggest worry is that the UK and the European Union, which have provided more aid than the United States to the Ukrainians, are going to step up and provide even more. And Putin, by the way, I'm sure is very glad that Joe Biden was very cautious and incremental in providing aid to the Ukrainians instead of, on February 22nd, 2022, announcing that we will provide the most lethal modern weapons as fast as we can get them to the Ukrainians. He did this little incremental stuff. Trump is going to do everything he can to reduce U.S. support. But my guess is, from knowing Donald, is he'll keep a little bit of support in there simply because he wants to have leverage over everybody, and that would include Putin. He doesn't want Putin to feel absolutely free. He doesn't want Putin to think that he is his lapdog, even if Donald is.
Fiona, she went on to say that she felt that the Russian president and the US president, they both shared the same view of the world being divided up by Russia, the US, China, seeing them as the three major powers. It's something that we hear talked about a lot, this idea of a reorganization of the global powers. How do you think that works when we've got these tariffs on China, for example?
We should be very concerned that the world will be divided up into three, as George Orwell wrote in 1984, and suppressing knowledge so people think that love is hate, ignorance is strength, and war is peace. If I were Donald, I would be mostly worried that, much as I would like to see strongmen run the world, I would be mostly worried that the EU, the UK, Canada, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, and maybe a few other countries would create a free trade zone and lock the U.S. out of that. That would be very devastating. 2 years ago, Donald gave a speech when it was clear he was still running for president that the U.S. is going to lose the dollar as the world's reserve currency. It's going to be an absolute disaster. And he was, of course, blaming all this on Biden, who left office with an economy performing so well, the Economist magazine called it the envy of the world. And that's all gone now. It's been completely trashed. The stock market's down and very volatile at the moment. We're seeing huge layoffs. The Trump administration is taking highly trained lawyers, scientists, statisticians, and others, and turning them literally into clerks at places like Social Security. So we have $150,000 a year clerks instead of doing the work that they should be doing. And in all of these dealings, Donald is all based on bluster and bluffing, and that won't last. In any contest between Beijing and Moscow, I'll go with the educated guys in China in terms of long-term strategy and outcomes.
I want to turn now to Elon Musk, because we heard that he said that he's going to significantly cut back his role in the US government to focus back on his company Tesla. What did you make of that?
Well, Elon Musk has a real problem. Tesla is the core of his fortune, together with contracts from the US government. And he's gotten himself new contracts and new opportunities and has vanquished the in-house watchdogs who were looking into his violations of his contracts. And notice there's only one car company in the world that's in trouble, just one, and it's Tesla. In addition to having trashed his own brand by his conduct and offending many Republicans, and by the way, the people who buy Teslas in America, They're liberal Democrats, almost all. It's overwhelmingly how much Tesla depends on liberal Democrats. Those people, many of them are selling their cars. The singer Sheryl Crow gave hers away. And so the only reason his profits didn't go negative is A, he has a lot of cash that's earning interest, and Donald wants to reduce interest, by the way, interest rates, and B, his batteries that are not for cars but for storage and power interruption, those are still selling well. His car lineup is also getting really old. He has not refreshed his car line. You can go buy an electric car. I drive an electric car. There are so many better electric cars on the market. So he's got to pull back. And as a CEO, he is vulnerable to shareholders suing him. And I expect there will be shareholder lawsuits over his not paying attention to his fiduciary duty, his duty of loyalty to shareholders.
I mean, if we looked at Mark Zuckerberg, for example, so he's going through an antitrust trial on Meta's ownership of WhatsApp and Instagram. I mean, it's been reported that Zuckerberg he's visited the White House about 3 times in a lobbying effort to try and get Trump to discuss this case, get rid of this case. I mean, when we look back to seeing Zuckerberg, Musk, all those other tech billionaires standing there at Trump's inauguration, do you think that they would be in these positions that they are today for both Musk and for Zuckerberg?
Remember that this case against Zuckerberg, the antitrust case, which means suppression of competition, was brought originally by the Trump administration. And Donald believes that Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook and some of the other tech billionaires have been working against him. And of course, he believes everyone should be loyal to him and not question what he says, or as Donald has said many times, you shouldn't be allowed to write things about me unless I approve. So Donald could interfere in this case and he could stop the pursuit of it. Zuckerberg has not been successful in doing that. We don't know what Donald is demanding of Zuckerberg as a condition of doing that. And I'm not sure there's enormous harm here to Meta, the parent of Facebook. This case is about acquiring Instagram, which has ads and things on it, is quite popular, but also WhatsApp, the encrypted communications area, which has basically no revenue. So if he loses WhatsApp, I'm not sure that's harmful to Meta. Instagram would be somewhat harmful, but maybe that will cause him to focus more on Facebook, on making it more functional, doing new things to it, and getting more ad revenue out of it. But so long as this case is alive, Donald has a lever on Zuckerberg and an implied lever on anybody else who could be subject to antitrust actions, that is, suing them for trying to be illegal monopolists. There are legal ones, but we're talking about illegal monopolists.
So we're coming up to Trump's first 100 days in his second presidency. What's really stood out to you in this near 100 days?
Well, he's been far more effective this time around than in the first administration. I wrote a book partway through it called It's Even Worse Than You Think. And I showed where there were some cases that he had succeeded in his effort to destroy the federal government's effectiveness. But in most areas, he didn't do anything or wasn't successful. This time, he's got people who are zealots and who are, in many cases, competent managers who are in messing things up for him. I am literally surprised that he has taken the Social Security Administration, from which 70 million people, including me, get a check every month, and messed with it. I think, as Steve Bannon, Trump's former chief strategic advisor, has repeatedly warned, do not mess with Medicaid, which is the healthcare program for poor people and is primarily used by Trump supporters, Republicans in the red states are the lower income states in America, and with Social Security. And that they've taken people who are important managers of the Social Security system and turned them into clerks is going to cause a great deal of trouble. And there have been meetings all over the country where people who are Republicans in deep red districts have been shouting and yelling at their congressperson, and there are a number of congresspeople who will not hold town hall meetings. So I'm mostly surprised that Donald wasn't more strategic. Go after the things that are easier to attack. And Social Security and Medicaid that will rile up the people who you think of as your base. Now, a lot of them haven't moved away from him yet. But when you're going to see news stories before long that will feature a mother your age saying, my 8-year-old baby is going to die because Donald Trump took away Medicaid. My mother, who helps with caring for my children because I have to work full time as a single mom, she's dying because insulin that Biden brought down to $35 a month is back up to $1,000 a month. You're absolutely going to see things like that. And then the other that's really been shocking to much of the public, but not to me because I expected this, is his rendering people without trial and sending them to this death camp. And that's what the prison in El Salvador is. It is a death camp. You go in alive, you come out in a bag. One of the people who was swept off the streets was asked to show his tattoos and said, oh, you're a gang member. It turns out his tattoos, which we now have photographs of, are the name of his mother, his daughter, a tiger, a lion, and he's a barbershop icon, not a gang member. And Trump refuses to do anything about it. He's defying the courts. He thinks he can get away with this because in 2023, the U.S. Supreme Court said a president has immunity for any official act. If the Chief Justice of the United States, John Glover Roberts Jr., isn't rethinking that, I would be very surprised.
David, thank you for joining me on the Trump Report today.
Glad to be with you, Joe.